There were folding chairs, flowers, and fairy lights strung across my barn. A white gazebo I'd never seen before stood right in the middle of my alfalfa field, and people in suits and gowns were walking across my land like they owned it. A wedding, on my ranch. And I hadn't approved a single thing. "Excuse me?" I called out, stunned. "Who authorized this?" A woman in a glittery dress turned around, wine glass in hand. "Oh, you must be the groundskeeper. Can you move those bales of hay? They're ruining the photo angle." I blinked, my face heating up. "No," I said firmly. "I own this ranch." "Who told you could be here?" That's when I saw her, Karen Withers, the head of our homeowners association. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, smiling and talking with a man in a tuxedo who looked just as smug. She was pointing at the view behind my stables, nodding like this entire place belonged to her. I stormed over. "Karen," I snapped. She looked up, her smile falling when she saw me. "This is private property," I said. "You scheduled a wedding here without asking me." Karen took a sip of her champagne, then calmly said, "Technically, the HOA has shared access rights to the community greenbelt. And this isn't a greenbelt," I cut in. "This is my ranch." "It's for a good cause," she shrugged. "It's Mayor Denton's daughter's wedding. Very important guests. You should be honored." That's when I said the words I never thought I'd say in my life. "Fine. You leave now, or I call in a demolition crew." Karen's wineglass froze mid-air. "You're bluffing," she said. But I wasn't. And when that yellow Caterpillar machine rolled up the gravel path, engine growling, the crowd screamed as if they'd just seen a tornado touch down. Now let me tell you how we got here. My name's Jake Whitman. I'm 49, divorced, and I've lived on this 8-acre ranch in Oklahoma for over 20 years. This land was my father's, and his father's before him. My days are quiet, feeding the goats, tending the garden, watching the sun paint the skies orange. Peace. That's what I worked for. But peace doesn't mix well with the HOA. See, I live in a gated development called Cedar Pines. Most of the folks moved in during the housing boom. Doctors, lawyers, city council types. Fancy folks. When I refused to sell my land to make way for the Lakeview Clubhouse expansion project, they weren't happy. But I held my ground. Then came Karen. Karen Withers, the new HOA president, moved in from California with a clipboard, a chihuahua, and a mission. Her blonde bob was always stiff with hairspray, and her eyes scanned like radar. She once fined me $500 because my barn door was painted non-neutral red. "You agreed to HOA rules when you signed," she always said. But I never did. My land was grandfathered in. Their documents didn't apply to me. That didn't stop Karen from trying. The wedding issue started 3 weeks ago. I remember because it was a Friday and I was hauling sacks of chicken feed when a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Karen stepped out, flanked by 2 other board members, Susan, who spoke like a phone operator, and Neil, who always wore golf clothes but never played. They handed me a flyer. Cedar Pines is proud to host Mayor Denton's daughter's wedding on July 23rd. Location, the scenic Whitman Pasture Overlook. I stared at it. "This is my land," I said. "It's for the community." Karen replied sweetly. "It'll be one afternoon. We'll handle cleanup." I shook my head. Not happening. Karen's smile thinned. "Jake, this event is very important. Your cooperation would mean a lot to the HOA." "I'm not part of the HOA." Karen leaned closer. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I tossed the flyer back at them and walked inside. For a week, nothing happened. Then I noticed my back gate had been left unlocked. I found tire tracks in the grass and pieces of tape marking out spaces in the field. One day, a vendor tried delivering folding chairs. Another time, a woman with a clipboard started measuring the barn. Each time I told them to leave. They never did. I called the sheriff. He said it was a civil matter. "Unless you catch them in the act," he said, "it's hard to prove intent." Then came July 23rd. I had no warning, no letter, nothing. I was inside fixing the water heater when I heard music blasting from the back fields. I looked out the window and nearly choked on my coffee. There were cars parked along the dirt path, dozens of them. My cattle gate had been removed entirely. There were decorations everywhere, lights, banners, even a photo booth set up next to my horse stable. People in dresses and suits wandered across my land, stepping over irrigation lines like they were party streamers. I ran outside. That's when I confronted the wine glass lady, then stormed toward Karen. You already know what happened next. I warned them. I called the demolition crew. Now, here's something about me most people don't know. I used to work in construction before I took over the ranch. My buddy Derek owns a demolition company out in Tulsa. I called him that morning and told him to be on standby. And Derek's not the type to ask too many questions. Bring the cat in a flatbed, I said. Going hunting? He joked. Wedding crashing, I replied. He laughed and said, be there in an hour. So when that big yellow machine started crawling up the gravel path, dust cloud behind it and metal arm raised high, it wasn't an accident. The guests started screaming. Someone dropped their champagne glass. The best man ran toward the parking lot yelling, "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Karen sprinted toward me in her heels, nearly tripping in the dirt. "What are you doing?" she shouted. "You're going to ruin everything." I crossed my arms. "This isn't your land, you're trespassing. This is illegal. So was your wedding." Then I gave Derek the nod. The machine's engine roared louder, and just before the arm swung, a loud voice rang out behind us. "Everybody stop." We turned. It was Sheriff Marley stepping out of his patrol car, hand on his belt, squinting in the sun. And just like that, everything froze. I could hear the wind rustling the corn stalks. Somewhere, a phone was still playing Ed Sheeran. The demolition machine idled, its claw raised in midair. The sheriff looked at me, then at Karen, then back at me. "Jake," he said slowly, "you mind telling me what in God's name is going on out here?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Karen beat me to it. "He's trying to destroy a wedding. He brought a bulldozer to crash it. He's out of control." Sheriff Marley raised a brow. "Karen," he said, "whose land is this?" "Technically, the HOA has—" "I said whose land?" he repeated, firmer. Karen hesitated, and that's when someone else stepped forward from the crowd. A woman in a white dress, the bride. She looked between Karen and me, then walked over with a trembling voice. I didn't know," she said. "They told me it was part of the HOA parklands. I had no idea this was your home." I stared at her. She looked genuinely upset. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. For a second I felt a twinge of guilt. This wasn't her fault. It was Karen's. But before I could say anything, the demolition engine revved again, this time on its own. Sheriff Marley turned, eyes wide. "Derek!" I yelled. "Cut the engine!" But Derek wasn't in the driver's seat anymore. The claw came crashing down and hit something it wasn't supposed to. Everyone screamed. Sheriff Marley dove for cover. Karen dropped to the ground. And I couldn't believe what had just happened. The metal claw smashed into the gazebo like a hammer hitting glass. Wood exploded. White beams snapped and flew in every direction. The delicate string lights that were wrapped around the poles ripped away and sparked briefly before going dark. The whole structure collapsed in one loud, shattering crash. People screamed. Someone yelled, "Call 911!" Others grabbed their children and ran toward their cars. I stood frozen, mouth open, staring at the splinters of what had been a wedding centerpiece moments ago. The demolition claw rose back into the air, dripping wood and dust. Derek came running back from behind the machine, eyes wide. I left it in idle. I didn't think—" He looked at me, panicked. "I went to take a leak, man." Sheriff Marley was shouting into his radio. "We've got damage. No injuries yet. Send backup units. Might have a riot here." Karen was sitting in the dirt, her glittery high heels kicked off, hair wild, breathing heavily like she'd just seen a ghost. The bride stood in shock, her hand clamped over her mouth. A groomsman gently pulled her back from the mess of broken boards. No one was hurt. But something else had shattered besides the gazebo. The illusion. This was no simple mix-up. This was something bigger. The fact that the HOA went behind my back, used my land without permission, and then dragged the whole town into it like it was nothing. That wasn't just disrespectful. It was dangerous. And illegal. I turned to Karen. You told the mayor's family this was your land? She didn't answer. Sheriff Marley stepped between us. I'm going to need both of you to cool off, he said. I need statements. But first, I need everyone else gone. He turned to the crowd and barked into his megaphone. This event is over. Clear the area immediately. People began trickling out. Some guests took photos of the destroyed gazebo. Others threw Karen dirty looks as they passed her. The mayor himself, short, red-faced, and sweating, stormed past without saying a word to either of us, his daughter in tow. I looked around at the mess on my land. Empty wine glasses, food trays, confetti, wires, torn flowers, the remains of the gazebo. It was like a circus had exploded. Sheriff Marley pulled me aside. Jake, you need to understand something, he said in a low voice. The mayor's involved. This is going to make headlines. I didn't care, not anymore. I want to press charges, I said. Trespassing, property damage, fraud if I can. Karen lied to those people and booked an event on land she didn't own. The sheriff sighed. It won't be easy. The HOA has lawyers. The mayor has influence. You sure you want to go to war? I looked at my barn. The goats were huddled at the edge of the pasture, clearly spooked. I looked at my fields. My irrigation system had been trampled. The sunflowers I planted last month were all stomped flat. I looked at Karen. I'm not at war, I said. I'm reclaiming my home. He nodded slowly. All right. But keep it clean, Jake. No more bulldozers. He paused. And get that machine off your land. Now. I walked over to Derek, who was sitting on the hood of his truck, head down. You okay? I asked. He shrugged. Didn't mean for it to drop like that. I patted his shoulder. You didn't know. It's all right. Thanks for coming anyway. He gave me a weak smile and climbed back into the machine. It roared to life and slowly backed out the way it came. By nightfall, the property was empty, silent again, but it didn't feel peaceful. Not this time. I spent hours picking up trash. I pulled shattered wood out of the soil and carefully gathered broken glass from the fields. My boots crunched over destroyed flower beds. As I worked, I thought about my father. How proud he was of this land. He used to say, "Respect what feeds you, son. You don't spit on the ground you eat from." Karen had spit, and she was about to learn what that cost. The next morning, I made calls, first to an attorney, a friend of mine from high school named Todd Belson. Todd was sharp, honest, and didn't like the HOA either. He listened patiently. Wait, they forged event rights and had a public gathering on private land? He asked. Yep. Without insurance? Nope. Damn, he muttered. They're done. He told me we had a solid case, trespassing, civil damages, possibly fraud. He asked me to send pictures and any documents they left behind. I had photos of the flyer, the tracks in the field, and now destruction from the event itself. Let me start filing, Todd said. We'll hit them with a cease and desist by Monday. Then I called a surveyor. I wanted new signs, bigger ones, clear ones that said, private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I even asked him to help me re-fence the back part of the land with motion sensors and floodlights. I wasn't taking any more chances. That evening, something unexpected happened. I was sitting on my porch with a cold beer when a white car pulled up the gravel drive. I stood up, already tense. A woman stepped out. It was the bride. She walked slowly up the path, still in the same white dress, now dusty and torn at the hem. She held her shoes in her hand and looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't say anything. I didn't know, she continued. Karen said it was HOA property and that you had signed off months ago. She made it sound like it was all formal. Didn't you wonder why no one from the venue showed up? I asked. She smiled weakly. I guess we were too busy with planning. It all happened fast. I sighed and leaned on the porch rail. You didn't deserve that mess. Your wedding should have been a happy day. She nodded. It was ruined, but not by you. There was a long pause. I brought something, she said, reaching into a small purse and pulling out an envelope. It's what we would have paid for the venue. I think it belongs to you. I took it and opened it. Inside was a check for $4,000. I can't take this, I said. You didn't mean any harm. It's not for you, she said. It's for the land, for the mess, for what Karen tried to get away with. I stared at the check, then slowly nodded. Thank you. She turned to leave, then looked back. I hope you make them pay, she said. People like that think they can get away with anything. After she left, I sat back down and looked at the check. Then I looked at the stars, and I made myself a promise. No matter how long it took, no matter how many doors I had to knock on, how many meetings I had to attend, I was going to make sure Karen answered for this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Karen said that day. Technically, the HOA has shared access. How did she think she could twist the law like that? The next morning I went digging. Literally, I went into the back office, opened the old metal filing cabinet, and pulled out the dusty property deeds, the HOA agreements, and the land plats from when my father signed over the ranch to me. Then I found something. Something I hadn't paid attention to before. A note, scribbled in my dad's handwriting. Don't let them get to Parcel C. Parcel C. I unfolded the land map. Parcel C was the section where the wedding had taken place. A chill ran down my spine. Why would he write that? What was buried in Parcel C? And why did Karen want it so badly? I stared at the map, and suddenly I knew. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was about the land itself, and I was going to find out what they were hiding. The next morning I was out in the fields before the sun rose. Boots on, hat pulled low, shovel in hand. Parcel C. That part of the land had always felt different. Flatter, more isolated, and a little too perfect. My dad never let us play there growing up. He kept the fence around it tighter than the rest, and he even planted dense brush on the west side so no one could peek through. At the time, I thought it was just to keep the goats in. Now I knew better. I walked slowly to the center of the field, the exact spot where Karen's rented gazebo had stood before it got flattened. There were still splinters of wood sticking out of the ground, but I ignored them. I unfolded the old map again, lining up the corner stakes. Right in the middle, where the dirt darkened and the grass grew sparse, was an X in pencil, barely noticeable unless you were looking. Parcel C. I planted my boot into the earth and shoved the shovel in. Thud, shove, thud. The ground was harder than usual, almost packed. After a few minutes, the shovel hit something that didn't sound like rock. Clank. Metal. I knelt down and started clearing the dirt by hand. It took me 20 minutes, but eventually I uncovered a rusted hatch. A handle. Rectangular. Like a door into the ground. I yanked hard. It didn't budge at first, but then, creak, it popped open, revealing a dark hole beneath. A crawl space. I grabbed my flashlight, took a breath, and dropped down. It was a tight squeeze. The air was musty, and cobwebs clung to my face as I moved. The space opened into a small concrete room, maybe 10 by 10 feet. There were shelves, a metal filing cabinet, and a dusty wooden desk. On the wall, yellowed papers were tacked up, surveys, signatures, and maps. Some were stamped with red ink. Confidential. Cedar Pines mineral claim. I blinked. Mineral claim? I scanned the documents quickly. There were mentions of rare earth metals, water rights, and a Project Lakeview proposal dated 1987, way before Cedar Pines was ever developed. The most important paper of all sat in a locked file box on the desk. The key was taped underneath. When I opened it, I found what looked like a private lease, a 99-year land rights lease my father had signed with a company called Redbird Holdings, Inc. But the key detail? Parcel C was exempt from any residential or commercial development. It was protected land, leased only for natural resource study and preservation. It couldn't be sold, built on, or used for public events. And Karen had just hosted a wedding on it, a wedding that may have violated federal land use law. I climbed out of the crawl space and wiped my hands. The wind had picked up. Clouds rolled over the hills. I didn't know who Redbird Holdings was, or if they even still existed. But this changed everything. Back at the house, I scanned the documents and emailed them to Todd, my lawyer. His response was immediate. "Jake, this is big, like lawsuit big." I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing. Karen didn't just schedule a wedding on my land. She did it on federally protected land she had no right to touch. And she knew. I was sure of it now. Later that afternoon, I headed into town to get supplies. As I parked outside the hardware store, a few folks were gathered by the bulletin board, reading a large notice pinned to it. One of them saw me and whistled. "Jake," he called. "You seen this?" I walked over. It was an HOA bulletin, printed in bold font. Emergency HOA meeting. Wednesday night subject. Behavior of Mr. Jake Whitman damages to community event. Below that, they had listed everything. Reckless endangerment, property destruction, public intimidation, and, laughably, emotional trauma caused to wedding guests. "They're blaming me?" I asked. One woman, Margaret from Lot 14, folded her arms. "Word is Karen's spinning the story, saying you went rogue and endangered the mayor's family. She's rallying the board to file civil charges." I clenched my jaw. "Let her." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "You've got something?" I leaned in. "Oh, I've got something." That night I worked until midnight preparing a document binder for Todd. Photos, maps, the mineral lease. I even found a scanned copy of my dad's old letter to Redbird Holdings, stating clearly that Parcel C is never to be touched by HOA jurisdiction. Then, as I stood in the hallway looking at the binder, something occurred to me. Why was Karen so desperate to use that land? Why that patch of ranch? She had the whole HOA park, the clubhouse, even a lakeside trail. Why risk a lawsuit? Unless she knew about Redbird Holdings and what was buried under that soil. I had to find out. The next day I drove to the county records office and asked for anything on Redbird Holdings. The clerk typed into her database and shook her head. "Company dissolved. Last activity was in 2009. "Who owned them?" She flipped through the records. "Looks like it was a shell company. But wait." She clicked something, then froze. "Here we go. Look at this." She turned the screen. Redbird Holdings, Inc. was founded by someone named James Denton. I leaned closer. James Denton, the mayor. My heart pounded. I stepped back. So this wasn't random. It was planned. Karen, the mayor, the wedding, the push for more HOA jurisdiction. They weren't just trying to host an event, they were trying to legitimize a land grab. If they used the land, and I didn't stop them, they could claim established use. And if that happened, they could move to formally annex the parcel under HOA management. This wedding was never about celebration. It was a smokescreen. I left the office in a daze, gripping my keys so hard my knuckles turned white. I needed more evidence, and I needed allies. That evening I drove to Neil's house, one of the HOA board members who always followed Karen's orders but never looked comfortable doing so. His house was quiet. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see me. "Jake, I know you're not a bad guy," I said. He sighed and stepped aside to let me in. "I didn't vote for the wedding," he said quietly, but Karen pressured the board. She said we'd lose HOA funding if we didn't support it. She said you'd never fight back. I handed him a copy of the mineral lease. This is what she's really after. Neil scanned it, then looked up, eyes wide. Holy hell. She knew, I said. And so did the mayor. Neil nodded slowly. They wanted the land under HOA control. The wedding was the first step. You interrupting it? You stopped their timeline. That's why she's furious. I took a deep breath. Will you speak up at the meeting? I asked. Tell them what you know? He hesitated, then nodded. I'll be there. As I drove home, the storm clouds that had gathered all day finally broke. Rain hammered the windshield. Thunder rolled across the open sky like cannon fire. It felt fitting. The HOA thought they could bury me in noise and paper, in lies and party tents. But they didn't know what my father left behind, and they didn't think I'd fight this hard. They wanted a quiet rancher. What they got was a storm. I pulled into the driveway and saw a single sheet of paper taped to my front gate. It was wet from the rain, but the words were still visible. HOA notice. Your actions violate Article 12, Community Cooperation Clause. You are hereby ordered to appear before the board. Failure to comply will result in property liens. They were escalating. Hard. But what they didn't know was that I had a secret weapon, and on Wednesday night, I was going to blow their whole plan apart. Wednesday night arrived like a brewing storm, hot, heavy, and full of electricity. The HOA meeting was held in the Cedar Pines Community Hall, a fancy brick building with too much glass and not enough soul. Rows of white chairs were set up in front of a polished wooden stage. A podium with the HOA seal stood proudly beneath a large digital screen reading, Special Emergency Meeting, Conduct Review, Jake Whitman. I walked in wearing my work boots, jeans, and a plain flannel shirt. No need to dress up for a sham trial, but I wasn't alone. Behind me came Neil, the board member who'd agreed to speak out. And beside him, Margaret from Lot 14, then Mr. Grady from Lot 22, the owner of the hardware store, the ranch hand from across the way. Word had spread fast. I may not have lived in their HOA boxes, but people knew who I was. They'd seen what Karen did. The place was packed. Karen sat on the stage flanked by Susan and two other board members. She wore a dark navy blazer, pearls, and a face that looked carved from stone. The mayor wasn't there, but his presence loomed over every word. She took the podium. This meeting, she said, has been called to address the behavior of Jake Whitman, specifically his reckless endangerment of community guests, destruction of shared amenities, and refusal to cooperate with HOA planning policies. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Karen continued. Mr. Whitman brought a demolition vehicle to a wedding. He destroyed a rented structure. He caused mass panic among citizens. And he embarrassed this community in front of very important public figures. She held up a document dramatically. Under Article 12 of the Community Cooperation Clause, we are within our rights to pursue financial penalties, property liens, and formal removal of Mr. Whitman from shared community oversight. I leaned over to Neil. They're going for my head. He whispered, Wait for it. Karen turned to the crowd. Now, before we take a board vote, we will allow Mr. Whitman 5 minutes to speak. 5 minutes. Generous. I stepped up to the podium, cleared my throat. Then, instead of talking, I held up the lease. This, I said, voice calm, is the mineral rights lease to Parcel C, my land. It was signed in 1987 by my father and a company called Redbird Holdings, which was secretly created by Mayor Denton. The room went dead silent. Karen's face twitched. I continued. According to this lease, Parcel C cannot be developed. It's protected. It's outside of HOA control, and hosting a wedding there, on federally leased land, isn't just illegal, it's potentially criminal. Gasps rose from the crowd. Karen knew, I said. She lied to the bride, lied to the board, lied to you. I turned to Neil, who stood and stepped forward. I'm on the board, he said, voice shaking slightly. Karen pressured us to vote. She said if we didn't go along, we'd lose funds. She never told us the land was protected. The room erupted into murmurs. I raised my hand. There's more, I said. Karen wasn't just helping the mayor's daughter. She was helping the mayor himself. James Denton created Redbird Holdings. He wanted to reclaim the land through use, so they could annex it. This wedding was just a front. I dropped the final bomb. I've filed an injunction with my attorney. A federal review is underway, and if this HOA doesn't want to be the subject of an investigation, I suggest you all take a very careful look at who you're following. Silence. Then voices, angry ones. Someone yelled, "You used us, Karen." Another, "Is this true?" Karen stood up, her face pale. "This is slander," she hissed. "None of that is proven." "It's all in here," I said, waving the binder. "Maps, letters, handwriting, official stamps. You want proof? I'll pass it around." I handed it to the nearest resident, who opened it like it held gold. The room cracked open with whispers, mutters, and the rustling of pages. Then Margaret stood. "I move that we postpone this hearing indefinitely," she said, "until a full investigation is completed, including Karen's actions." Cheers erupted. Karen's gavel hit the table. "That's not procedure." But no one was listening to her anymore. Another board member, a quiet man named Don, cleared his throat and stood up. "I second the motion." Karen spun toward him. "Don't you dare," but he spoke over her. "All in favor?" Hands shot up, nearly every one. Karen's hand stayed down, her face hardened like cement. Motion passed, the meeting adjourned. I stepped back from the podium, shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but then I felt a hand on my back, Margaret's. "You did it," she whispered. Not yet, I thought. Not fully. Outside, I stepped into the cool night air and looked up at the stars. My land was still mine. My voice had finally been heard. But the damage wasn't over. The mayor wouldn't go quietly. And Karen? She wasn't done yet. The next morning, I received a letter. No postage. Hand-delivered. Slid under my door. "You think you won? This is bigger than you know. Back off, or else." No signature. Just a threat. I looked out the window and realized this battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The letter sat on my kitchen table like a snake in a bird's nest. It was written in all caps, typed on plain white paper, and had no fingerprints, at least none I could see. No return address, no marks on the envelope, just those 5 chilling words: back off, or else. I stared at it for what felt like hours. I wasn't scared exactly, but I wasn't stupid either. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't some HOA fine printed on letterhead or a snarky comment from Karen about paint colors. This was personal, direct, and angry. Whoever sent it wanted me rattled. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I folded the letter, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and called Todd, my lawyer. "You need to bring that in," he said. "We'll run it through the right hands. Might even get a handwriting analyst or look for watermarks. You think it's from Karen? I think you've kicked a very large, very angry hornet's nest." And he was right, because that afternoon, the hornets came flying. It started with a truckload of gravel. Literally. A dump truck pulled into my ranch road around 3 p.m. and unloaded 2 tons of crushed granite across my main entrance, blocking my gate completely. The driver didn't say a word, just dumped the load, handed me a slip marked HOA Work Order 307, and drove off. My blood boiled. Then came the county inspector. "Got an anonymous tip," he said. "Your barn might be violating new zoning codes." I asked, "What new zoning codes?" He shrugged. "Just here to check it out." And just like that, he was walking around my property, snapping photos of every shed, stall, and fence post. It wasn't coincidence. It was Karen, or maybe the mayor, or both. They were trying to drown me in red tape. I spent the next 2 days putting out fire after fire. Code checks, noise complaints, even a letter saying my irrigation well needed a water usage audit due to unusual activity during the wedding. Unusual activity? You mean 200 strangers tromping around my land like it was a city park? I wasn't just angry, I was exhausted. Every time I cleaned up one mess, another appeared. But then something happened that shifted the wind back in my favor. Late Thursday night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but picked up anyway. "Mr. Whitman," a young voice said. "This is Emma Denton, the bride, the mayor's daughter." I sat up straight. "Emma?" "I didn't know who else to call," she said, her voice shaking. I'm not supposed to be talking to you, but something's wrong." I felt a jolt in my spine. "What happened?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I found something in my dad's office about your land." "Go on." "I think they've been planning to seize Parcel C for months through something called eminent domain light, some shady partnership between the HOA and a company called Pinnacle Systems." The name meant nothing to me, but the words eminent domain sent a chill through my bones. "That's illegal," I said. "The HOA can't file eminent domain. That's government only." "I know," she whispered, "but they're trying to use a loophole. Something about zoning it for community utility and then leasing it to a private company. I don't understand all of it, but they're not just trying to take your land. They think there's something under it." That confirmed it. This wasn't about a wedding. It was never about a wedding. It was about what was buried in Parcel C minerals, water reserves. I didn't know yet, but they wanted it bad enough to risk prison. And if they were trying to steal it through zoning tricks and shady leases, that meant there were documents, paper trails, evidence. Emma offered to meet me quietly the next night to give me copies of what she found. She said she'd hide them in a library return book at the town archives, inside a biology textbook from the 1990s. It felt like something out of a spy movie. I agreed. The next day I went into town and found the book in the discarded bin, just as she said. Inside the pages were 6 folded printouts, including emails between Karen and someone at Pinnacle Systems, and a draft lease agreement for Parcel C. It was damning. Karen was trying to declare my land a community recharge zone, a fake term meant to make it sound environmentally important, but instead of preserving it, the plan was to hand it off to a mining firm under a 40-year lease. In return, the HOA would get a silent investment return and board incentives, kickbacks, bribes, corruption. I photocopied every page and sent it to Todd. He called me within the hour. "Jake, this is gold. We don't just have a defense anymore, we have a counterattack." That night I sat on my porch watching the moon rise, a cool beer in my hand. But I couldn't enjoy the peace, because something else happened. A truck, late, no headlights. It rolled slowly down the hill near Parcel C and parked just beyond the tree line. I killed my porch light and watched. 3 figures stepped out. One held a flashlight, another had a clipboard. The third looked like he was digging. I grabbed my phone and started recording through the scope of my hunting rifle, zoomed in just enough to catch their faces. One of them was Karen. Another was a man I didn't recognize. The third? The mayor. They were surveying the land, at night, illegally, trespassing. I kept filming until they drove off 20 minutes later. Now I had them, but I needed to be smart. The next day, I made 2 copies of everything. The documents, the footage, the mineral rights, the lease, the photos from Parcel C. 1 copy went to Todd. The other? I mailed to a local news reporter I trusted, Maria Thorne at Channel 7. She'd exposed corruption in the county years back and wasn't afraid of power. I included a simple note. "Everything you need is here. Dig deeper. Ask about Pinnacle Systems. Ask about Parcel C. Jake Whitman." Then I waited. 2 days later, it hit the news. Breaking. HOA land grab scandal exposed. Mayor linked to illegal mineral deal. The fallout was instant. Karen's phone number was shut off. The mayor's office refused to comment. Residents of Cedar Pines gathered in angry circles demanding answers. Margaret called me that evening, breathless. "Jake, everyone's furious. HOA members are resigning. Don even threw his badge at Karen's car." But I wasn't celebrating yet, because one thing kept eating at me. Why dig at night? Why now? Unless they found something, or worse, they buried something, and I needed to find out what before it was too late. The next morning I returned to Parcel C, not with a shovel this time, but with purpose. Something was off. The grass near the center was freshly disturbed. The soil looked darker, like it had been turned overnight. Tracks led in and out, wide enough for a small excavator. Whatever Karen, the mayor, and that third man had been doing here in the dark, it hadn't been casual surveying. They were hiding something. I walked the area carefully, my boots pressing into soft ground, until I found a patch of dirt that was too smooth, too intentional. I knelt and dug with my hands. Only a few inches down, my fingers hit metal. Another hatch. Smaller than the first one I'd discovered, but new. The hinges weren't rusted. This one had been placed recently. They were burying something. I pried it open with a crowbar from my truck. Inside was a black watertight case, like the kind used for sensitive electronics or evidence transport. I lifted it out slowly, my hands trembling from adrenaline. When I opened the case, I froze. Inside was a thick manila envelope marked Pinnacle Systems, Phase 2, Confidential, a portable hard drive, and a flash drive sealed in a static-proof bag. Beneath that, a folded map showed more than just Parcel C. It covered the entire Cedar Pines area. Red X's dotted the map in a grid. Each X marked a mineral-rich section, including under the HOA park, the lake trail, and, most heavily circled, my land. There were annotations in the margins. Test borehole results positive. Phase 2, expand lease zone via annexation. Final step, remove current landowner obstruction, JW. JW, me. I sat back in the dirt, heart pounding. This wasn't just shady real estate manipulation. This was a coordinated plan to remove me, by force if necessary. The marriage, the gravel dump, the code violations, the threats. It all made sense now. They weren't just greedy. They were dangerous. I returned to the house and immediately called Todd. When he picked up, I said, "I found something worse than we thought. Come over now." He arrived within the hour. I handed him the box and he sifted through it, face tight. "They were planning full-scale mineral extraction," he muttered. "And these documents, this hard drive, this is corporate espionage material. We're not just looking at a civil suit anymore." "What do we do?" Todd looked up. "We call the feds." And we did. We contacted the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Department of the Interior. We sent scanned copies of everything and overnighted the physical case to a federal investigator. Todd warned me it could take time, but the content was enough to initiate an immediate inquiry. By the weekend, news vans were camped outside Cedar Pines. Maria Thorne from Channel 7 came back with a full investigative team. The town was buzzing. Residents packed into emergency meetings demanding Karen resign. The HOA board was in total meltdown. 2 members had already quit. Susan had fled the neighborhood entirely. But the most surprising moment came when Mayor Denton, looking worn and frazzled, appeared on the evening news. "I had no knowledge of any illegal activity," he said. "These documents are forgeries. I deny any connection to Pinnacle Systems or the events Mr. Whitman describes." But he was sweating bullets. And then came the twist. On Monday morning, a federal agent named Special Investigator Holbrook knocked on my door. Tall, quiet, polite, but stern. He flashed his badge and asked to walk Parcel C with me. I took him straight to the hatch. He nodded, examined it, and called in a tech team within the hour. By that afternoon, I watched 6 government vehicles arrive at Cedar Pines. Investigators swarmed the HOA office. Laptops were seized. Boxes of records were removed. They even towed Karen's Range Rover. I should have felt victorious, but I didn't. because Karen was gone. Her house, empty, mailbox, stuffed with unopened letters. Neighbors said she'd packed a single suitcase the night before and drove off around midnight. One person thought she was headed to Arizona. Another said Mexico. Whatever the truth, she'd run. And the mayor? He disappeared from public view. Rumors swirled about pending indictments, offshore accounts, and secret business ties to Pinnacle Systems. The town was on fire with gossip, but while the legal war was underway, I focused on something else. Healing the land. The wedding debris was finally gone. The trampled sunflowers? I replanted them. The fencing was rebuilt stronger. The motion sensor lights were upgraded. And the best part? The people. Dozens of neighbors, some I'd barely spoken to, came by to help. They brought paint, tools, even extra hands. Margaret organized a cleanup crew. Neil helped rebuild the irrigation pipe. Emma Denton, yes, the bride, showed up with a tray of cookies and a handwritten note that read, "You protected more than your land. You protected all of us. Thank you." But just when I thought things were settling down, one more surprise came. A knock on my door. I opened it to see Special Investigator Holbrook again, this time holding a federal envelope. "We analyzed the flash drive," he said. "There's something you need to see." He opened the envelope and handed me a printout. It was an internal Pinnacle Systems memo. Subject line, Parcel C, Operation Shutdown, approved by JDKW. Below that, a directive ordering the forced removal of any non-compliant landowner via environmental safety violations or artificial disaster triggers. I read it 3 times. Artificial disaster? Holbrook nodded. They planned to stage an emergency, a fire, a spill, something that would allow them to seize control of your land through emergency action. I sat down hard. They were going to burn me out, I whispered. Holbrook's face stayed calm. "We'll prosecute them. Every name on that memo." I nodded, my hands shaking slightly. "Thank you." As he left, I looked back toward Parcel C. It looked peaceful now, but the scars were still there, on the land, and in me. They'd tried to take everything. My home, my peace, my life. But I was still standing. And they were falling. But I knew this wasn't the final page, because one name hadn't surfaced yet. The third man from that night, the one with the clipboard. He wasn't Karen, he wasn't the mayor, and he wasn't in any of the records. Which meant the biggest secret might still be buried under my ranch. Waiting. 2 weeks passed. Cedar Pines was a different place. The HOA was in shambles. The community board dissolved temporarily. Karen was still missing. Mayor Denton had stepped down due to health reasons, which was a fancy way of saying he was hiding from subpoenas. The media frenzy died down after the feds confirmed ongoing investigations. But for me, the storm wasn't over. That third man, the one with the clipboard, haunted me. I watched the video I took that night over and over, zoomed in, enhanced, even ran it through facial recognition software Todd's tech guy had access to. Nothing. He wasn't a local, wasn't HOA, and wasn't Pinnacle Systems, at least not officially. But then, something clicked. In one of the documents Emma Denton gave me, an old scanned email chain, there was a name in the CC line. Martin Schaefer. He wasn't mentioned in any context, just copied. I looked him up. Nothing came up at first, but after digging deeper, I found an archived website from 2014, a consulting firm specializing in land asset transitions and private sector reclamation projects. The owner, Martin Schaefer. He disappeared from public listings after 2015. I showed his picture to Holbrook. "That's your guy," Holbrook confirmed. "Freelancer, known for helping companies stage fake emergencies to force buyouts. Usually operates in quiet rural zones where oversight is minimal." So that was it. They were going to set a fire, poison the well, block my access, blame me for hazards, and then sweep in to rescue the community, all to claim what lay under Parcel C. But there was one thing no one had figured out yet. What was so valuable beneath my land? I had the mineral rights file, but no list of specific resources, no drilling records, nothing recent, until a letter arrived, old, yellowed, postmarked from 1994. It was addressed to my father, from someone named Dr. Hal Bishop, head of a university geology program. The letter had gotten lost in the attic, tucked behind the rafters. I found it while storing some supplies. Inside it said, "Jim, based on the core samples you sent from Parcel C, we estimate a rare vein of scandium and other high-demand metals used in aerospace engineering. Keep it quiet. This could change everything." Scandium, rare, expensive, light, used in aircraft, electronics, and advanced military tech. That's what they were after. My land wasn't just dirt and grass, it was a gold mine. No wonder they'd stop at nothing. I took the letter and core sample bag. Yes, my dad had kept one sealed in a box, to a lab Todd recommended. The results? Verified. Parcel C contained one of the richest scandium deposits in the lower 48. It was worth millions, maybe more. And here I was, a rancher who barely broke even some seasons, who thought he was just defending his land from a wedding. Now I understood the stakes. They wanted to rob me of a legacy my father had quietly protected all his life. Well, not on my watch. I filed for a federal protective designation of the land, blocking any future commercial or municipal interference. I hired a geological attorney to lock in the mineral rights under my name and established a trust so no developer could coerce me into selling. I even worked with a sustainable mining co-op to explore ethical extraction that wouldn't destroy the land. But most importantly, I went public. Channel 7 aired a full special on the ranch war at Cedar Pines. They showed everything. Karen's lies, the HOA's power games, the wedding disaster, and the scandium discovery. People all over the country reached out. I became a symbol, not because I fought with violence, but because I refused to back down. Still, justice hadn't finished its course. 2 months later, I got the call. Special Agent Holbrook. "Karen was found," he said, "living under a false name outside Sedona, Arizona. Will she be charged?" "Oh yes, wire fraud, land conspiracy, multiple counts." "And the mayor?" "His immunity deal fell through. Looks like he'll be standing trial." "And Schaefer?" Holbrook paused. "Gone. No known address. But we're tracking offshore payments that tie back to him." So one snake escaped, but most of the pit had been torched. I stood again on Parcel C that night under a full moon. The sunflowers were growing again. The soil felt rich, reborn. I thought of my father, and how quietly he'd guarded this secret. And I thought of the people who'd helped me. Emma, Margaret, Neil, Todd, even Derek, who'd brought the bulldozer that started it all. They reminded me that when you stand your ground, not with bullets, but with truth, good people will stand with you. The next day, I threw a party on the ranch. No weddings, no gazebos, just a big cookout, fire pit, neighbors laughing, kids running around the barn, real community. As the sun set, Margaret clinked her soda bottle to mine and said, "So what's next for the man who beat City Hall?" I smiled. "Peace," I said. She grinned. "Until the next HOA tries to build a golf course on your tractor." We laughed, but deep down, I knew I was ready, because I had learned something powerful. They can schedule a wedding on your land without permission, they can throw threats and lawsuits and dump gravel at your front gate, but they can't bulldoze your will unless you let them. And me? I'll never let them. Not now. Not ever.